it was a little bit disappointing in how his career had turned out, but at least you can say that Faiq stuck to his path. And for myself, I mean looking back, I feel very privileged to have been one of the unique few to have really spoken to him directly, although at that time he was just only 17. But it's in a way pleasing to see that he has still managed to stick it out, carve out a unique career as a footballer, and to keep showing that to enjoy the game with his teammates. Hi Teenager viewers, this is Gary here, and instead of giving my usual analysis or insights on football in Southeast Asia, particularly in Malaysia and Indonesia, allow me to tell you a story which I admit I've not shared with in public for roughly a decade until now. Have you ever heard of the Bruneian footballer Faiq Bolkiah? If you do, then yes, you probably have been aware of this footballer with a very unique family background. Unlike many footballers, including your Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi, who all come from average commoner background, Faiq Bolkiah also happens to be the nephew of the Sultan of Brunei, His Majesty Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah, and the son of His Royal Highness Prince Jeffrey Bolkiah, who was once Brunei's finance minister in the Sultanate's golden economic era in the 1990s. And without wanting to go so much into depth about the Brunei royal family, because it's not about the royal family I'm talking about, although I will still touch about it in bits and pieces when it's sports related. I'm going to particularly share with you all about the very unique interview I have with this royalty footballer at Bukit Gombak Stadium in Singapore close to 10 years ago, which was roughly on the 27th or 28th of May 2015, and how it all actually came about, what actually happened, and also subsequently the thereafter, and how his entry into the sporting scene as a footballer had influenced other his cousins in the family to also pick up sports and play competitively for Brunei Darussalam. And how did it all actually all come about? Because I confess, even looking back right now, I'm still amazed that I'm one of the very few journalists in the world to actually have interviewed a royalty footballer. Never mind royalty. I mean, when it comes to royalty, especially in this part of the world, I mean, we normally talk about people who are very invested into football, like your Tunku Ismail Ibrahim, the current regent of Johor, with his Johor Darul Takzim, or even the Crown Prince of Brunei, His Royal Highness Prince Al Mutalti Billah, who is the man who founded the Duli Penggiran Muda Mahkota Football Club, or DPMFC, which is currently competing in the Singapore Premier League and will soon re-enter into the Malaysia football scene for the upcoming 25-26 season, although details are yet to be emerged. And then, but when it comes to actively playing football itself and featuring visibly at the international stage, Faiq Bolkiah is the 21st century trailblazer in this regard, because you rarely hear in the world about royalties who choose to pick up a commoner sport to play the game of the masses, when usually when you equate royalty with the rather high class or atas sports such as equestrian, polo, or show jumping, I mean, which is part of equestrian, or something that is more related to their status, their unique status in global society, rather than football, which is always known as the game of the masses, where you can find any space, any area to play, as long as you have the ball, as long as you have a few friends who are willing to play with you. And how did this particular setup interview with Faiq Bolkiah even all came about? Well, it actually turns out it was much simpler than expected. I made prior to the interview, back I think 1 or 2 months before the 28th Southeast Asian Games in Singapore was to begin, I had gotten wind from a friend or colleague, a media friend, that there's this particular prince who will be playing football for this tournament. Yep, I had heard about it, but I did not pay much attention to it. And it was actually after a rather casual conversation that set off this, I think, unforgettable 2 hours or so at Bukit Gombak Stadium that would see me eventually become, as it turns out, one of the rare few, I think you can count with one hand, to have actually spoken to this royalty footballer who is now currently plying his trade with Thai League One side Ratchaburi FC. I mean, it still amazes me, close to a decade on, how I had actually even managed to pull this off. And it all began with a very innocuous Facebook messaging platform where Mike Wong, the Singaporean who was then in charge of the technical side as the head of the technical department in the Football Association of Brunei Darussalam. He and I actually, because we met, I knew him from his days when he was coaching at Geylang United, now known as Geylang International, when he was guiding the first team squad. And also, I think when he was appointed in Brunei, I went to Brunei to visit him, in part then when I was interviewing the former Blackburn Rovers manager Steve Keane for a separate story on for 442 Singapore Malaysia, which was then the print magazine version for the Malaysia Singapore edition. So where that is concerned, on that particular day afternoon, I think 27th of May, I think, it was just a casual conversation that started the whole thing on Facebook. It was on Facebook Messenger. I remember Mike, just messaging me like asking me whether I was interested to do an interview, and I was actually pleasantly surprised because I didn't expect this invitation to chat by the former national assistant coach of the Singapore national team, who is in that capacity as the technical director of Brunei football then, to make this request. And after a few back and fro, it was like, okay, let's go. It was like a case of quickly, let's go, wash up, and then I made my way down to Bukit Gombak Stadium, which is located in the west side of Singapore, where it is located near to the Bukit Gombak train station there. And when I arrived at the Bukit Gombak stadium, it looked quite usual. I mean, like your typical stadium which was built in the 80s or 90s, where you got the concrete slabs. Although this location was a bit unique because one of the areas that was facing it was like your little Guilin, in terms of the scenery that's opposite. But what particularly stood out for me then when I reached the stadium was there was not just only a official SEA Games vehicle, but there were also, I think, 1 or 2 police cars Obviously, there was a team bus as well, but what caught my attention was, I mean, in the midst of people coming in and out of stadium to do their jogging, their exercise routines, or athletics training, there were four uniformed police officers, yeah, from the Singapore Police Force who were patrolling outside the stadium, which to me is unusual, very unusual, because not even for ministerial events in Singapore do you see such presence. And it seems like the people who were in and out of the stadium doing their own things were oblivious. No one had the inkling, and it was probably just as well, because people still continue to go about their regular routines. So, but it was unusual. It gave me the first sign that there was somebody unique who is inside the stadium. And from there, I went in. And when I went in, the Brunei Darussalam under 23 national football team was then having a, you can say, a training session or training games or sparring session with a local side, not a local league side, but it's a local team. And it's just to make a few fine-tuning or preparations ahead of their opener against Vietnam in the first match of the football tournament, which will begin, I think if I'm not wrong, on the 30th or 31st of May that year. And what I also noticed, although that initially I sat quietly there watching the whole thing, it's like there were people still jogging around the stadium, because don't forget, most of the stadiums in Singapore still have the 8-lane athletics track, so people were jogging. So there's no sign of it being exclusively reserved just for the Brunei national team to just train in peace, because almost all the stadiums in Singapore except Jalan Besar, or I think probably other football specific stadiums, which is we can count with again one hand, it's like, unless it's very specific football stadium, otherwise it's always open to the public to do their exercises, their own athletics training or cardiovascular exercise without the gym equipment, to do their thing. And I think in the midst of it all, there was Faiq Bolkiah, who was training with his national teammates. He stood out quite prominently on the physical side even before I spoke to him. It's like, because the rest of the footballers are commoners, and that included the current DPMM FC captain Azwan Ali Rahman. So it's like he stood out because, one, his physique. Even for a 16 or 17-year-old boy, he already had that build of, you can say, which is similar to an up-and-coming British or English trained footballer in the elite academy, because he was then training as a scholar in the Chelsea Academy, which was then for the, I think you can say, from 16 to 18 years old. So that physical side stood out a little. But then you got a few as equally talented players in Azwan Ali Rahman and one or two other players, but the rest all pale a little in terms of physical frame, in terms of, you can say, how they turn out, because they are strong, but it's not like they have been through the European football training the way Faiq Bolkiah had done. There was still that scrawniness that we can often associate with Southeast Asian males in around our age, particularly in your Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia type, even though they are already by then building a bit of muscle during the adolescent years. And Faiq is not only the youngest player in the squad as a 17-year-old, he's also the captain of the under 23 football team. And given that he had that the Brunei FA had to talk to Chelsea to actually negotiate a special release for him to link up with the under 23 football side to feature in the Southeast Asian Games. So that was already quite a feat itself. So prior to that, I did a little bit of research about Faiq on how he was doing in the Chelsea academy, among whom his teammates were future England internationals Ruben Loftus-Cheek. I think Ruben is the most notable among a number of these players from his cohort who will go on to feature in the English Premier League and also represent play international football for their countries. So from there on, he stood out on this physical aspect. Then after that, I caught up with Mike. Stephen Ng, the 1994 Malaysia Cup reserve goalkeeper for Singapore. He was the head coach of the squad. So because I know them personally, so it's a bit of a quick catch up in person, and then I was introduced to the head of the Brunei Sea Games delegation who was also present, and also to the few people who were also protecting Faiq and all. I think they were there to keep a close eye or keep a good eye on Faiq, so that lest any other foreign journalists who have also heard about him attempt to do a flash interview without permission. Because let's face it, the system in Brunei is rather unique, especially when it comes to royalties. Even their local media, they cannot just cover the royalty if it's not an official event, if it's just on the fly, like even for footballers in the mixed zone or interviews. Because in that era already, where you can see footballers being managed by agencies, by companies who dedicate themselves into the public relations image of those footballers to put them in favorable light. In this aspect, the Bruneians are unique because they do pay particular attention to the image of the royal family, whether it's locally or overseas, to put as much favorable light on them as possible, even for a very distant heir like Faiq in this case. So how do we know? So after all the pleasantries and introductions, I was given permission to speak to Faiq, and at the end of this particular training session, so we sat down at one corner of the Bukit Gombak Stadium pitch. Yeah, just one corner where the players were cooling down and they were taking out their tapings. And what immediately stood out from that observation was, while every other Bruneian player in that squad was taking, like, let's say this is a arm taping. So in those tapings, like let's say, for instance, because I'm not going to show leg for this, so I'm going to use an illustration using a hand. Let's say you have a taping on the arms, on the wrists, like goalkeepers would do. Normally they would take out those tapings after a training session on their own. But in Faiq's case, in this case, the leg tapings, the ankle tapings for the outfield players, while everybody was taking out on his own, Faiq had a kit man, the national team kit man, to cut the tapings for him. Yes, that in a way exemplifies a bit of the unique status. Then around him, I also saw the two bodyguards who I had noticed patrolling around the pitch side. If you have seen how Messi has had his bodyguards being vigilant, walking along the sidelines as he's playing for his current club, Inter Miami, in the Major League Soccer, it was already there. There were two bodyguards. Both of them look very strong, very buff. One is a local and another is African, black African, I think, looking guy. They are very buff, very stout. They are not here to mess around with. And then there's a personal assistant or personal aide who is there to make sure that I didn't ask anything that is a bit out of line. But generally, given the explicit permission I had with the delegation, thanks to Mike, so I was able to do the interview on that one corner. I sat down and spoke to him And still remember how the length of the interview and also the questions I asked, because it was around 15 minutes. 15 minutes where I just sat down, asked him quite a lot of questions. It's like asking him about Chelsea, the club that he was then um, playing for in the academy. How was it like to be playing in the British Academy? How was it then like to also be training alongside his first team seniors such as John Terry, Didier Drogba, and the likes, when it came to combined training sessions, especially during international breaks when when the London club will have many of their first team's players away on international duty, so the rest who were not involved, they will have these combined training sessions with the under 18 squad, with the under 23 squad. Yeah, just to fulfill training commitments. And I did ask about their then first team manager Jose Mourinho, like how was he like, and subsequently I went on to ask him a bit about his cousin's football club, Duri Pengiran Muda Mahkota FC, DPMM FC, which is still currently playing in the Singapore Premier League since 2009, barring with the exception of two pauses. One was between 2010 and 2011 due to FIFA suspension of Brunei football then, and during the COVID enforced absence in 2020 and 2021. Yeah, so I asked about his cousin's football club, football in Brunei. I mean, talking about Steve Keane, who was there coaching the DPMM FC first team in the Singapore League, and then also his own aspirations for the future and all that. It is very telling that Faiq has been properly trained in media relations in how he gave his answers. He exuded a maturity that was beyond his adolescence youthful age of 17 years. It's like his answers were crisp, they were sharp. It helped that he had a good upbringing where he was born to Prince Jeffrey and his American mother, so you can tell that his English is up there. It's at a very good level, and he gave slick good answers, and at times very on point when he talked about how training sessions were, particularly when he pointed out that Mourinho had no time to look at status. It's about he's there as a player, and if the player makes a mistake, whatever the status or background, he has to be scolded, whatever, nonetheless. And it's quite clear that Faiq takes it by the chin, and takes it by the chin, and he was eager to be working hard to show what he could do as an emerging footballer that in one of the best academies in England, and to show the rest of Southeast Asia the footballer that he was promising himself to be. Because what stood out even in the research I did was his dribbling. It's quite clear that it's a very well trained. He had a very systematic individual training as well, because his training, you can see that he was emulating from his idols, whoever they were, and also that movement, the running on and off the ball, and subsequently even during the tournament, the penalty goal he scored against Laos in front, the game in which his father watched. But back to the interview itself. So his ability to take on defenders, his fearlessness in going at them and running past them, getting past them with his dribbles, and also his knack in finding his sweet spot for a goal, even though he's not always the sharpest shooter. But because of the level of talent in the Chelsea academy is clearly worlds apart from the Brunei under 23 national team. And even though they also have an equally talented player in Azwan Ali Rahman, who would eventually become the Singapore S League, now Singapore Premier League, Young Player of the Year that year, it's like you can say that it's a overall miles apart in terms of the talent, in terms of the training, in terms of the football education, and what I subsequently saw in 4 of Brunei's 5 games. I think take away the Thailand game, is that he generally attracted the interest. But a little bit more on that later. I go back to the interview itself. So for the interview, during the interview, when I was talking to him and he was giving his replies, there were 2 bodyguards were standing in front of me to make sure that there would be no other person who would try to gate crash or try to cause any issues, because his name was already quite high on many of the Southeast Asian nations, especially the reporters who were sent to Singapore to cover the games. It's not just about football, but on other sports as well. But in the lead up to the SEA Games itself, take away the whole my home nation's build up as a big sporting festival. Many of the overseas media, they were quite interested in this particular footballer himself. Never mind that Brunei is by global standards or even Asian standards, a football backwater. It's like, hey, there's a royalty footballer, and that I had observed during the interview. Excuse me. So that I've observed during the interview, where while I was talking to him, I had a glance at those pillars and the stands, and I had noticed at least 2 other Southeast Asian journalists who were hiding behind those pillars, and they kept looking up. And they were wondering who is this Singaporean wearing this particular Chonburi jersey. Yes, fortuitously, he will end up playing for Chonburi later in his career. He's like, why is this guy sitting down here talking to Faiq as though he had all the time in the world to talk? And throughout this whole interview process, I only focused on his football in his home country, a little bit on his family background, but only about the Crown Prince, even though I did write about him being the nephew of the Sultan in the original article on 442. But never at one point did I mention about him being the world's richest footballer. That never came from me. That eventually came because of what other people interpreted from. I don't think it was just from my article, but also subsequently from how those various YouTube videos, or ironically Daily Mail in 2015 talked about him as the Sultan's nephew, the value of the wealth and all that. But none of these were in my thoughts during the interview. It was all about football, royal family a bit, but it's still on football and nothing else. Not about the wealth, not about the status, not about the privilege, none of that. It was all 15 minutes of pure football talk, and a little bit about the family, still on football also. Yeah, and that was the only thing I focused on throughout the 15-minute interview I had with Faiq. And there were no complaints. It's like the interview went smoothly. His aide took a photo of the 2 of us after the interview at the stadium, which I posted on Instagram, on my Instagram handle Blitzhawk, back in 2015. Maybe I have to revive that photo subsequently, but still, it was one that's there for posterity. Even though after the games I never really met him, although I still track his progress there and then, and even in those casual conversations I had. And I watched 4 out of Brunei's 5 matches during the games, and take away the last game, which clashed with the Singapore-Indonesia game when Brunei were playing Malaysia in their final group game, where Faiq once again gave a quick, you can say, mid-zone interview with Reuters, where he spoke about how satisfied he was, how his campaign had turned out, how he had won new admirers, and how he was able to generate a bit of publicity on Brunei football through his efforts on the pitch. And already, I mean, while I was able to give that interview with Faiq over that period, the Southeast Asian journalists tried, after I was done with the interview, they tried. The Indonesians, I think, the Vietnamese, they tried. They tried to rush to the officials, they tried to plead, they tried to talk, but it's quite clear they do not understand how the Brunei system operates. I think the protocol. It's like when it comes to royalty footballer, it is not that easy to just interview him as and when you like. I mean, if they were trying to go after Azwan Ali Rahman, they could have tried that, and it would have been a lot easier than Faiq. But but simply because they were going after Faiq, so it became quite complex, a bit more difficult. Yeah, and so after that, the next day I brought photographer Lim Wei Xiang to take the photos, the images of Faiq, the first public images of Faiq Bolkiah as a footballer. Yeah, which became quite well known around the world. The first images, and subsequently, it's quite telling that there was that Faiq Bolkiah effect, because in the opening game between Brunei and Vietnam, which I remember it was played at 4 p.m. at the Bishan Stadium, it was a rather lopsided game which ended 9-0 in favor of the Vietnamese, but something stood out in that first half. Something stood out. It's like 90% of the Vietnamese photographers were camped behind their goalkeeper, their own nets. Why? All were very eagerly looking forward to taking photos of Faiq playing, dribbling with the ball, him in action in the warm-up, because by then I think it had taken hold and they were quite keen to see how he was like. Although it was quite clear that without the support of teammates who weren't at the same level as Loftus-Cheek and company at Chelsea, it was always going to be a bit of an uphill task. So unfortunately, they suffered a 9-0 defeat. Subsequently, they also lost their remaining games, but the game against Laos, I think, Laos or Timor-Leste, that was when Faiq scored a penalty. After he earned it, I think after Azwan Ali earned the penalty when he was fouled inside the box, and in front of his father, His Royal Highness Prince Faiq Bolkiah, he converted the goal with ease, with penalty. And subsequently, he made a very good impression in the 2015 SEA Games as a footballer. Creditable performance overall, where he led by example. He lived with the rest of the footballers inside the same hotel despite his royal status. Yes, Faiq was staying with the rest of the team. There was no such thing as a special privilege just because you are royalty or from the royal family. He stayed in the same hotel as the rest of the Southeast Asian teams who were also playing in the football tournament at the SEA Games. I remember it was a 4-star hotel located at Balestier. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but yes, it was there. So I subsequently saw him a few times at the hotel and also at Mission Stadium where he was playing. Then also, I think he led the way for other royalties such as His Royal Highness Prince Martin, Her Royal Highness Princess Fazila, to all also venture into sports in subsequent Southeast Asian Games campaign, where Prince Martin became the heart stealer in the 2017 Southeast Asian Games in Kuala Lumpur for his bronze medal winning act in polo, and subsequently his own father, Prince Faiq Bolkiah, also won gold in polo in the last SEA Games, which was held, if I'm not wrong, not Philippines, I think it was in Vietnam. Yeah, I think in Vietnam, yeah, where they won polo. No, Cambodia, sorry. I think it's in Cambodia. Even his father was inspired to also play for his nation and won the gold medal. Yes, so that was the legacy Faiq has set when it comes to royalty being involved in sports. But what about the rest of his career since? He's at the peak of his career, which I subsequently shared with the two British journalists who inquired about how Faiq was like during the interview, given that in the years since, as it turns out, take away the now defunct progressive radio, which is actually a Bruneian media, private media, then there were, apart from I think one or two other Bruneian publications, there were very few journalists in the world who had interviewed him, as I found out. The BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC tried, they couldn't. I think I won't be surprised if other global news networks tried, but also they failed as well, because really, it's really not easy. The royalties like to keep their lives private. And as also subsequently, in a footnote, the Crown Prince's son, His Royal Highness Prince Mutakim, he has also picked up football and has represented Brunei in the national age groups like Faiq did previously, and also currently plays for his father's club, yes, literally his father's club, in the Bruneian Super League, their top flight domestic league. Yes, now DPMM have two teams, one in the Singapore League, but subsequently from next season, 25-26 season, they return to Malaysia after an absence of 17 years, and the Brunei Super League, because they do now value that the purpose of having a club to compete in your domestic league, however the level of opposition, but they want to show what they can do in terms of developing their own players or building their own squad. Although it's not at the same scale as your Johor Darul Takzim or Buriram or other leading clubs in Southeast Asia, but they are getting a foundations right for a number of years already. Ever since I think the establishment of under 20 squad under Steve Keane back then. Yes, I know. I'm mentioning the former Blackburn Rovers, and I think currently he's the technical director of this Georgian club, Torpedo Kukatsi, where he most recently guided the club's second place finish in the Georgian league last year. Yeah, but Faiq's trailblazing act has allowed other royals to come forth and utilize sports as a way to show that they can perform in a public sporting platform, particularly Princess Fazila in netball and Abdul Mutakim in football, Prince Mutakim. But what about Faiq's career since? I mean, as I talked to Rob Tanner of The Athletic, and very recently Les Rupanarin, yeah, of the senior news reporter for Daily Mail Online. Like, what has happened since? It was also like in 2016 where he also subsequently made his full national team debut, where he actually had one memorable highlight in the now defunct AFC Challenge Cup semi-final, a tournament involving the smaller minor nations in the continent, which was played in Sarawak, Malaysia, where in the semi-final against Macau, Faiq actually nearly scored a winning goal. It's like he had that run that from the middle, I think near the center circle, he dribbled all the way to Macau's box, where he shot agonizingly. It hit the crossbar. Although he dispatched his penalty in the subsequent shootout, but Brunei lost in that shootout in the semi-finals, having otherwise done well in the group stage. And after Chelsea, he also subsequently moved to Leicester City under 23, the Portuguese club, and then Chonburi, and now Ratchaburi, where he's back in action after recently recovering from a nasty injury that kept him out of the game for 1 year. And as you can say, he's a very unique footballer that not even your Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, Mbappe could ever think of. His like, in spite of his family background, Faiq strove to forge this career as a professional footballer with creditable clubs, with creditable leagues. And it was quite clear then that Faiq is more than capable of playing at least in the better Southeast Asian leagues. Although I admit, as I told Les, that I wasn't very sure he was going to cut it in Europe totally. Although credit to him for never stop for for persisting with this dream, even turning out for Leicester City in the UEFA Youth League, which is the corresponding youth competition for the teams that are competing in the UEFA in the UEFA Champions League for the season. Yeah, and although it was a little bit disappointing in how his career had turned out, but at least you can say that Faiq stuck to his path. And for myself, I mean, looking back, I feel very privileged to have been one of the unique few to have really spoken to him directly. Although at that time he was just only 17, but it's in a way pleasing to see that he has still managed to stick it out, carve out a unique career as a footballer, and to keep showing that to enjoy the game with his teammates. And although he has not been with the national teams after the 2019 Faiq Bolkiah trophy, but still, I think if the coach is able to come up with a coherent plan, is able to persuade him on what he's going to do with those current crop of other local players around him, they could be a competitive force. And I mean really competitive. Because unlike Messi, Faiq never has a bodyguard standing on the patrolling on the pitch. Never. I mean, it shows in a way a desire to be ordinary, even with a unique background setting. And the same applies for his younger cousin, Prince Mutakin. And I know it's very unique in a royal setting where the public, especially in Brunei, where the center of attention always has to be the royal family and nothing else. But it's also rather pleasing to see individual royals churn out their own respective careers. And I mean, for Faiq, eventually when he retires, there will still be something for him to do eventually. Or if he wants to live a life of quiet anonymity in peace, it's also good for him, because at least he's doing what he still loves to do. That is to play football, to train as a professional, to play as a professional. And in Thailand, he has actually done decently. Yes, decently. Even though you are not talking about your China teams or the Tiratos, or even in the Malaysian leagues where you talk about your Arif Aimans or even Shawar Anwars in Singapore, or even your Marcelino Fernandez, but still to be able to still eke up a good career there and to play in the Thailand top flight, it is something commendable, and I'm pleased to see that he has still stuck it out in the world of football as a player. Definitely no intention to retire. He's I think 27 this year, 10 years on. And I mean, I privately shared it with my friends or colleagues, but I will say this: the Faiq Bolkiah interview is one that I'll never forget through the end of my days.